Kartak was not having a good day, nor was any of his fellow soldiers, as the newest round of enemy bombardment began screeching through the skies as Kartak quickly braced himself against the trench walls to help steady himself before the blast rocked him back. The Barenta Republic, Kartak's home nation, had been declared war upon by the dastardly and barbaric Ortal hive, and so Kartak was stuck sitting in a trench waiting to die. The war had been going on for nearly a year now, and he had been one of the millions of soldiers who had been smart and hardy enough to survive in this hellhole, but dumb enough to still have signed up. Kartak shuddered as an artillery shell detonated close to the section of trench he had been assigned to. Kartak and his people were four-limbed amphibians not too dissimilar to the turtles of Earth according to humanity, their closest intergalactic neighbor other than the Ortal, and with a large oval-shaped shell encompassing the entirety of their torso, Kartak was begrudgingly inclined to agree. Not that my shell is going to keep me safe against an artillery round or well-placed plasma shot, Kartak thought grimly. Kartak was quickly snapped out of his thoughts as he realized that the bombardment had paused, which was not a good thing as one might expect. This was because the only time the insectoid Ortal paused in their bombardment was when they had decided to send in their newest fresh wave of warriors. Kartak would know. He survived the last two. A fellow Barentu to Kartak's right seemed to be confused as all of the veterans near them began grabbing their weapons and preparing to open fire across no man's land. Must have been one of the fresh replacements from the last troop transport. Hope they last longer than the last batch. The next transport won't be coming for a month or two. Just as the last of the newer reinforcements were shoved into place with their weapons at the ready, the Ortal battle cry sounded out all across the miles-long trench, and hundreds of thousands of enemy insectoid warriors. Kartak hefted their plasma rifle and aimed down sight in preparation of the order to open fire. And as the first of the Ortal hive drones entered firing range, Kartak heard the order given by his sergeant and promptly began spraying plasma downrange, and all around him others did the same. The first few ranks of the enemy warriors were cut down immediately, only to be trampled over by the next two, and the next and the next. Kartak continued to fire frantically as the enemy warriors quickly closed the distance between them and the trenches which kept Kartak safe. As Kartak fought, he barely heard a radio operator behind him shout out that reinforcements were on the way, which baffled Kartak. No reinforcements would ever reach us in time to provide any kind of support before we are all killed. Not to mention who would even be reinforcing us. The last batch was all we were getting anytime soon. For some context, pretty much all known species in the galaxy use wave tactics and attrition warfare when declared war on, as it is one of the more cost-effective ways to keep enemies at bay for long enough to sue for white peace. As a result of this, everyone uses massive transport ships which carry tens of thousands of souls in their holds, which is significantly more efficient compared to dozens of smaller transport ships. As such, losing a transport ship would cost thousands of lives and would be detrimental to the war effort, meaning no alien commander would ever think to deploy reinforcements anywhere close to the battlefield to ensure the safety of the transport ships. As such, reinforcements would need to march 2 miles before reaching the support trenches alone after arriving at the designated landing sites far behind the lines, meaning that there was no way for reinforcements to quickly reinforce the front lines. With all of that in mind, Kartak simply dismissed the radio controller's words as empty encouragement from high command to keep our morale marginally higher, so that we would fight just a little longer and inflict a couple more casualties to the enemy before we all die. However, before Kartak could refocus his rifle onto the enemy, a loud, almost deafening, whistling sound was blasted across the battlefield, which Kartak and his fellow veteran troopers initially thought was the sound of friendly artillery that was going to rain down on top of them. High command must have ordered for a collapsing defense. Can't say I blame them. At least we'll be taking a few of these damned bugs with us. Despite the incoming shells likely being the end of them, Kartak and his fellow veterans continued firing into the incoming enemy swarm, determined to take down as many of their enemies as they could before succumbing to the swarm. As the waves of chitinous Ortal warriors charged the trenches, the Barenta soldiers continued to pour fire into their ranks. However, it was beginning to look grim as more and more of the trench's guns were being silenced one by one. That was until one of the fresher recruits near Kartak pointed up to the sky and yelled, "Look, it's the reinforcements." Kartak and a few of his fellow troopers looked up to the skies with disbelief as a formation of three angular-looking atmospheric craft rocketed towards their position before dropping a long line of odd, smaller, devices into the Ortal formation. Before Kartak or any of his fellow soldiers could react, those small devices detonated, taking out swaths of the Ortal swarm, causing confusion and chaos within their lines. Something Kartak and his fellow soldiers took advantage of as soon as they broke free of the shock as well. As the Barenta soldiers opened fire on the panicking Ortal warriors and taking back sections of their trenches which had fallen into enemy hands, Kartak watches as a half-dozen transports, each 20 times smaller than the ones that he had seen before, dropped down from atmosphere towards their lines of defensive trenches. As the transports descended down to the surface, their missile racks expelled deadly projectiles, while the ball-mounted point defense turrets spewed out thousands of tiny projectiles into the Ortal masses which cut down large chunks of the now routing warriors. This level of fire support, while rather effective, was about what you would expect from, say, a decently armed tank. However, the suddenness at which they arrived and the speed it moved across the battlefield was astounding. One of the transports broke out of their formation before flying over to Kartak's section of trench, where it touched down and disgorged two full squads of strange, rather thin, bipedal soldiers fully encased in dark reflective armor. Kartak watched as the nearly 24 heavily armed and armored soldiers quickly fanned out across the area, taking up firing positions as two more bipedal forms emerged from what Kartak would learn was a rapid assault drop ship. Out of the last two soldiers to emerge from the ship, Kartak guessed that one was an officer, given they're slightly more ornamented than those of the previous two squads, and that the other was some sort of communications specialist, given the large piece of communications equipment strapped to their back which sported a few antennas. Kartak was somewhat surprised that the Vox operator could even carry such a large device, as it looked like it was about twice the weight of a standard Barenta field kit. The officer quickly surveyed the battlefield, which at this point was filled with Ortal corpses, before snapping their head to my sergeant, before speaking some kind of gibberish through their helmet, which soon enough translated their words into a form which we could understand. As my sergeant led their officer and Vox operator towards the direction of our current commander, a lieutenant which had been field promoted after the last one led a suicidal charge into no man's land. The two squads of soldiers dropped into the trench Kartak and his squad was holding. The no longer quite fresh rookie to Kartak's right muttered, "Humans, huh? They sure know how to make an entrance. Who the hell would think to send in transports right in the middle of an active battle?" One of the humans seemed to have heard what the trooper said as they turned their helmeted head and spoke through their helmet's translator. Who would drop straight into battle? The devil dogs, of course. Ora! As the human said the last word, the rest of his squad quickly repeated the utterance in unison. If you think we're crazy, you should watch the drop shock troopers. Then you'll really see crazy. Haha. Rapid deployment into a combat zone? How uniquely human.